The radar operator's boots hammered against the deck as he sprinted toward the fighter. Commander David McCampbell was already strapped into his Hellcat when the young sailor reached him, gasping. "Sir, 60 bandits inbound, 20 miles out." McCampbell's hand froze on the throttle. 60 enemy aircraft, 7 American fighters ready to launch. The math was death. It's October 24, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in human history, has just begun. And in the next 90 minutes, one man will either save an entire carrier fleet or die trying. If you want to find out whether McCampbell survives what happens next, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps us share these forgotten stories. And subscribe to World War II Ember if you haven't already. We're bringing history back to life, one mission at a time. Now back to the impossible decision. McCampbell stared across the flight deck of USS Essex. 6 other Hellcats were spinning up their engines, 6 pilots strapping in. Good men, young men. Some of them would probably be dead within the hour. He'd already lost 11 pilots in the last 3 months. He knew their names. He'd written the letters. He'd folded the flags. Lieutenant Morrison, shot down over Formosa. Ensign Caldwell, killed over Manila. Lieutenant Commander Harris, missing after the Taiwan raids, never recovered. Now the Japanese were coming again. 60 fighters and dive bombers closing fast on the American carriers, and McCampbell had 7 planes to stop them. Standard attack doctrine required a 3-to-1 advantage. The enemy had 9-to-1 odds in their favor. His fuel gauge read half full, no time to top off. The Japanese formation was 18 miles out, closing at 200 knots, maybe 6 minutes before they were in bombing range. McCampbell looked at the other pilots, young faces behind oxygen masks, hands gripping control sticks, waiting for his order. He was the air group commander. The decision was his alone. And he made it. He pointed at 5 pilots, then gestured south, hit the bombers. Then he looked at his wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, and tapped his own chest. 2 Hellcats would take on 40 enemy fighters. The tactical manual said never divide your forces when outnumbered, but the manual assumed you had more than 7 planes. McCampbell released his brakes. The Hellcat's Pratt & Whitney engine roared beneath him, 2,000 horses of raw American power. The deck blurred. The ocean dropped away. And then he was climbing into the humid Philippine sky with Rushing close behind. 3,000 feet, 6,000, 10,000. Ahead against the blue water he could see them. 60 dark specks. 60 enemy aircraft headed straight for Essex and her sister carriers. 2 American fighters to stop them. McCampbell armed his guns. 650 caliber Brownings, 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total. He'd need every single bullet. He checked his fuel one last time. Half tanks, maybe 90 minutes if he was lucky. He nosed the Hellcat over and dove toward the sun. At 20,000 feet, McCampbell had everything he needed: altitude, speed, and the element of surprise. Below him, the Japanese formation cruised at 12,000 feet, heading straight toward the American fleet. Fighters in a loose defensive circle around the bombers. Mostly Mitsubishi Zeros, fast, maneuverable, deadly. McCampbell had fought Zeros before. They could outturn a Hellcat at low speed. They could climb faster below 14,000 feet. But the Hellcat was heavier, 2,000 pounds heavier, and in a dive that weight became velocity. Velocity became killing power. McCampbell rolled into a 60-degree dive. The airspeed indicator climbed, 300 knots, 350, 400. The Japanese formation grew larger in his gun sight. He picked his target, a Zero trailing slightly behind the others. Always attack the straggler, the one the formation won't miss until it's too late. 800 yards, 600, 400. The Zero pilot never looked up. McCampbell pressed the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns erupted. Tracers arced across the sky. The Zero's right wing disintegrated in a spray of metal and fabric. The enemy fighter rolled inverted, and began its 4-mile death spiral toward the ocean. First kill. McCampbell hauled back on the stick. 4GS pressed him into his seat. The Hellcat's wings groaned but held. He climbed back to altitude. Rushing was already there, smoke trailing from his guns. Another Zero was falling. 2 down, 58 to go. The Japanese formation exploded in chaos. Fighters scattered in every direction. Some dove, some climbed. The disciplined formation vanished in seconds. McCampbell picked his second target, another Zero trying to climb to meet him. Bad decision by the Japanese pilot. McCampbell dove again, same pattern, same result. The Zero exploded in a fireball of orange flame, fuel and ammunition cooking off in a cascade of secondary explosions. No parachute. Second kill. And the battle settled into a rhythm. Dive, fire, climb, repeat. Third Zero at 7:52 a.m. Fourth at 7:56. McCampbell glanced at his fuel gauge between attacks. The needle was dropping faster than expected. All that climbing burned fuel. The main tank was down to a quarter. He switched to the auxiliary tank. Rushing stayed with him through every attack, firing shorter bursts, conserving ammunition. Smart flying. Fifth kill for McCampbell at 8:03. A Nakajima Oscar this time, an Army fighter. The Japanese were mixing Navy and Army aircraft in the same formation. Desperate measures. The Oscar had less armor than a Zero. It came apart under McCampbell's guns like wet paper. Sixth kill, seventh kill. McCampbell lost count of the attacks. His shoulder ached from the G-forces. Sweat soaked through his flight suit despite the freezing air at 20,000 feet. He could smell the cordite through his oxygen mask. The guns were heating up, barrels glowing. Eighth kill. He checked his ammunition counter. Less than 400 rounds remaining. He'd started with 2,400. 2,000 rounds burned through in 30 minutes. Rushing's Hellcat pulled alongside. The wingman was making hand signals, tapping his machine guns, then slashing across his throat. Out of ammunition, completely dry. McCampbell had a decision to make. The smart move was to escort Rushing back to Essex, but Japanese fighters were still in the sky, still threatening the carriers. And McCampbell had ammunition left, not much, but enough. He looked at his wingman and pointed down at another group of Zeros. Rushing nodded and followed him into the dive. The wingman had no ammunition, but he understood the tactic. His presence would split the Japanese pilot's attention, force them to track 2 threats instead of 1. A Hellcat without ammunition looked identical to a Hellcat with full guns. The enemy wouldn't know the difference until it was too late. McCampbell selected his 8th target, another Zero in a climbing turn. The Japanese pilot was good. He saw the Hellcats coming and reversed his turn to meet them head-on. Classic Zero tactic forced the fight into a turning dogfight where the lighter, more maneuverable aircraft had the advantage. McCampbell had seen this before. Coral Sea, Midway, the Marianas Turkey Shoot. He didn't take the bait. McCampbell rolled inverted and pulled through. Negative GS threw him against his straps. Blood rushed to his head. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. He completed the roll and came out behind the Zero. Perfect deflection shot, 300 yards. He pressed the trigger, short burst, conserving ammunition, maybe 50 rounds. The Zero's cockpit shattered. The canopy exploded in fragments. The aircraft snap-rolled left and fell away. No fire, just gravity taking over from a dead pilot. 8th kill. One more to break the American record. McCampbell climbed again, but his Hellcat felt sluggish. The engine was running rough, cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. He'd been running full throttle for 40 minutes. The engine was built tough, but nothing was built for sustained combat power at 20,000 feet in tropical heat. He spotted his 9th target at 8:40 a.m., a lone Zero heading west, running for home. McCampbell dove one final time. The Zero pilot saw him coming and tried to dive away. Wrong move. A Hellcat could outdive anything Japan had. McCampbell closed to 200 yards. He put the gunsight pipper on the Zero's engine cowling and fired his last extended burst. The tracers walked up the fuselage. The Zero's engine seized. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The aircraft nosed over into a vertical dive and disappeared into the clouds at 8,000 feet. Ninth kill. 9 Japanese aircraft destroyed in 90 minutes. American single mission record. No other Navy pilot in the war would ever match it. McCampbell keyed his radio for the first time since takeoff. Essex, this is McCampbell, 9 confirmed kills. The radio operator asked him to repeat. 9 confirmed. Then McCampbell looked at his fuel gauge. And his blood went cold. Main tank empty. Auxiliary tank, 1/8, maybe 20 gallons, maybe 30 minutes of flight time if he throttled back to minimum cruise power. He looked around for landmarks. The Philippine coastline was visible to the west, Luzon. The Japanese were retreating toward their bases around Manila. McCampbell had chased them almost 100 miles from the American task force. 100 miles back to Essex. 30 minutes of fuel. The math didn't work. He throttled back to bare minimum, 1800 RPM. The Hellcat shuddered but stayed airborne. Rushing pulled alongside and pointed at his own fuel gauge, shaking his head. Both Hellcats were running on fumes. McCampbell turned east and began the long glide back toward the fleet. He had to maintain altitude as long as possible. Height was potential energy, energy he could trade for distance when the engine finally quit. Every 1,000 feet of altitude meant roughly 2 miles of glide range. He was at 18,000 feet, maybe 36 miles of gliding if he was lucky. The Philippine coast fell away behind them, open ocean ahead, deep water. The temperature at those depths was cold enough to kill a man in 30 minutes, even if he survived the impact. McCampbell had no intention of testing those statistics. He adjusted his mixture to full lean and watched the fuel gauge. The needle was touching empty. The engine coughed once, twice, then smoothed out. Running on vapor. McCampbell saw the American fleet on the horizon, tiny gray shapes against blue water. Still 60 miles away. The engine coughed again at 50 miles out. McCampbell switched tanks, checked the gauge. Nothing, both tanks reading empty. The engine was running on residual fuel in the lines, vapor and hope. The propeller kept turning, but the engine note had changed, rougher, missing on cylinders. The Hellcat was dying. At 10,000 feet, still 40 miles from Essex, McCampbell could see the carrier task force clearly. 4 carriers in a box formation, cruisers and destroyers in a protective screen. He began descending faster, trading altitude for distance. 8,000 feet, 7,000. At 6,000 feet, the first 5-inch shell exploded 200 yards in front of him. Black puff of smoke, proximity fuse. American anti-aircraft fire. McCampbell's stomach dropped. The destroyer screen had spotted 2 aircraft approaching from the west, from the direction of Japanese bases on Luzon. The identification transponder in his Hellcat should have told them he was friendly. But IFF systems failed, transponders malfunctioned, radar operators made mistakes. Another 5-inch shell burst closer, 100 yards. The destroyer screen was firing a full barrage. McCampbell pushed his stick forward and dove toward the wave tops. Rushing followed. Both Hellcats dropped through 3,000 feet in 30 seconds. The 5-inch fire stopped. But McCampbell knew what was coming next. 4 Hellcats appeared at 2,000 feet, diving toward him. American fighters, VF-19 markings from USS Lexington. Attack formation. McCampbell had no way to identify himself. His radio was set to Essex's frequency. He couldn't switch channels without taking his hands off the stick. And he needed both hands to keep his dying Hellcat in the air. The 4 Hellcats closed to 1,000 yards, 800, 600. McCampbell could see their gun ports. The lead fighter was lining up for a shot. McCampbell broke hard left, 4GS. His engine nearly quit from the sudden throttle change. The 4 American fighters followed through the turn, trying to force him toward the water. Standard intercept procedure for unidentified aircraft. Rushing was in the same situation 500 yards away. 4 more American fighters on his tail. 8 friendly aircraft trying to shoot down 2 friendly aircraft. McCampbell's engine was coughing constantly now, running on nothing. He was 3 miles from Essex, so close he could see aircraft on the flight deck. But the 4 Hellcats behind him were closing, 400 yards, 300. The lead American fighter broke off. McCampbell didn't know why. Maybe the pilot recognized the Air Group 15 markings. Maybe someone on Essex had radioed the combat air patrol. Maybe luck. The other 3 fighters broke off and climbed away. Rushing's pursuers followed. The friendly fire incident ended as suddenly as it began. McCampbell's engine quit at 2 miles from Essex. Complete power loss. The propeller windmilled in the slipstream but produced no thrust. He was gliding. Airspeed 120 knots, sink rate 800 feet per minute, altitude 1,000 feet. He did the math. He would hit the water 1 mile short of the carrier. Then he saw USS Langley off his right wing. Light carrier, smaller than Essex, but her flight deck was clear. McCampbell turned toward Langley. Deadstick landing, no power, 1 chance. The light carrier was steaming into the wind. The wind gave him a few extra knots of airspeed over the deck. Maybe enough, maybe not. 800 feet altitude, 1 mile out. Sink rate increasing. 700 feet, 600. He dropped his landing gear. The hydraulic system was still working, gravity and residual pressure in the lines. The gear locked down with a reassuring thump. He reached for the flap handle but stopped. Flaps would increase drag and steepen his glide path. He needed every foot of altitude to reach the deck. Gear down, flaps up. Committed. Langley was growing larger. McCampbell could see the landing signal officer on the port side of the flight deck, yellow paddles in both hands. The LSO was giving him the cut signal, too high, too fast, wrong approach angle. McCampbell ignored the signal. He had no power to adjust, no throttle response. Physics was flying the airplane now, gravity and momentum and the last of his airspeed. 500 feet altitude, half a mile from the ship. He was going to make it. Barely. The Hellcat crossed the stern of Langley at 50 feet. The LSO dove into the safety net as McCampbell's landing gear cleared the roundum by inches. The Hellcat slammed onto the deck. Hard landing, the oleos compressed fully. The tail hook caught the number 3 wire. Perfect. The wire stretched. The Hellcat decelerated from 90 knots to 0 in 3 seconds, 8 GS forward. McCampbell's head snapped against the headrest. The engine died the instant the tail hook caught the wire. Complete fuel starvation. The deck crew ran toward his aircraft to unhook the wire and push the Hellcat forward. But when they tried to release the tail hook, the hydraulic system had no pressure. They had to manually disengage the hook. 4 sailors lifting and pulling while McCampbell sat in the cockpit, watching the fuel gauge register absolute 0. Rushing landed 30 seconds later. His engine quit on the rollout. 2 dead Hellcats on Langley's deck. Both pilots alive. McCampbell climbed out of his cockpit, his legs nearly buckled. 90 minutes of continuous combat, high GS, adrenaline crash. An ordnance chief climbed onto McCampbell's Hellcat to check the guns. He opened each ammunition bay and counted the remaining rounds. The chief climbed down and reported to the deck officer. 2 rounds remaining, sir, total. Out of 2,400 rounds loaded that morning, McCampbell had fired 2398. 99.9% of his ammunition. The chief had never seen anything like it in 3 years of carrier operations. The fuel crew checked the tanks. They opened the fuel caps and measured the depth with a calibrated stick. Main tank bone dry. Auxiliary tank bone dry. Reserve tank bone dry. The engine had been running on vapor for the last 5 minutes of flight. If McCampbell had tried to reach Essex, he would have gone into the ocean 3/4 of a mile short of the deck. The deck officer looked at McCampbell. 9 kills, 2 rounds of ammunition remaining, 0 fuel, landing on a different carrier because his own ship's deck was fouled, friendly fire from American destroyers and fighters on the return flight. The officer had been on Langley since Guadalcanal. He'd seen hundreds of pilots land after combat missions. This was different. McCampbell asked about the other 5 pilots from Essex, the ones he'd sent to attack the Japanese bombers. The deck officer checked his status board. All 5 had returned to Essex, 2 kills confirmed, 3 probables. No American aircraft lost. The Japanese strike had been completely broken up before reaching the carriers. No bombs on target, no torpedo hits. Task Group 38.3 had survived intact. A whaleboat transferred McCampbell back to Essex 20 minutes later. An officer was waiting on the main deck. "Commander, Intelligence Center needs you immediately." The Intelligence Center was deep in Essex's hull. Maps covered every wall. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was being tracked in real time. Red markers showed Japanese fleet positions. Blue markers showed American forces. The Japanese center force under Admiral Kurita was steaming through the Sibuyan Sea. 5 battleships, including the massive Yamato and Musashi, 12 cruisers, 15 destroyers. If they broke through, they would hit the American landing beaches at Leyte Gulf and slaughter the troops ashore. An intelligence officer briefed McCampbell on the afternoon air operations. Essex would launch another strike against the center force at 1400 hours, maximum effort, every available bomber and torpedo plane. McCampbell would lead the fighter escort. His mission: suppress anti-aircraft fire from the Japanese escorts while the bombers attacked Musashi and Yamato. Dangerous work. The Japanese had fitted their battleships with more than 150 anti-aircraft guns. The sky around those ships would be solid with flak. McCampbell had 90 minutes to rest, eat, and brief his pilots before the next launch. But there would be no rest. The battle was just beginning. The afternoon strike was brutal. McCampbell led his fighters in strafing runs against the destroyer screen, suppressing the guns, forcing the crews to take cover while the dive bombers and torpedo planes made their attacks. Musashi took 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits that afternoon. The massive battleship, the largest warship ever constructed, finally capsized and sank at 7:30 p.m. Over 2,000 crew went down with her. The largest warship ever sunk by aircraft. McCampbell landed back on Essex at 1700 hours. 2 more combat missions followed over the next 2 days. When the Battle of Leyte Gulf ended on October 27th, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. 26 warships, 300,000 tons. The Japanese Navy was finished as an effective fighting force. Commander David McCampbell flew his last combat mission on November 14, 1944. Air Group 15 returned to the United States for rest and refit. McCampbell had flown 212 combat missions, 34 confirmed kills, 21 aircraft destroyed on the ground. He was the United States Navy's top fighter ace. The ace of aces. The only fast carrier, task force pilot to receive the Medal of Honor for aerial combat. President Franklin Roosevelt presented McCampbell with the Medal of Honor in January 1945. The citation read that he had destroyed 7 hostile planes during the Battle of the Philippine Sea and 9 planes during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, while fighting desperately, but with superb skill against overwhelming air power. His actions had completely disorganized the enemy group and forced them to abandon their attack before a single aircraft could reach the fleet. McCampbell survived the war. He remained in the Navy and retired as a captain in 1964 after 31 years of service. He lived quietly in Florida. He gave interviews occasionally. He spoke at naval aviation events. He never claimed to be a hero, just a pilot who did his job. He died on June 30th, 1996, at age 86. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, USS McCampbell, was commissioned in his honor in 2002. The F6F Hellcat that McCampbell flew on October 24th sits in the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. Mincy, III, Bureau number 70143. The aircraft that carried him through 9 kills and a dead-stick landing. Preserved exactly as it looked that morning. Navy blue paint, white stars, the kill markings on the fuselage showing 34 Japanese flags. 2 Hellcats against 60 Japanese fighters. 9 kills in 90 minutes. 2 rounds of ammunition remaining. Engine died the second he landed. American single-mission record that still stands 80 years later. Commander David McCampbell proved what one pilot with perfect training, perfect tactics, and perfect courage could achieve when everything was on the line. If this story gave you chills, do us a favor, hit that like button right now. Every like helps YouTube show this story to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to World War II Ember and turn on notifications. We're rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives every single week. Real missions, real heroes, real history. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Our community stretches across the globe and you're part of keeping these memories alive. Did someone in your family serve? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Commander David McCampbell's story doesn't disappear into silence.